I'm determined to become a judge, to bring my family's crimes into the light. My name is Gabriel Knox, and the moment I discovered what my family really was, I stopped being their son. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Ethan's Way. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. I was 13 when I heard the truth. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where the sky looks bruised and everything smells like wet asphalt and rot. I was in the garage searching for a wrench to fix my busted bike chain when I heard my uncle's voice through the half-closed basement door. "She's not gonna talk," he said. "We made sure of it, just like the others." The coldness in his voice didn't match the man who always brought me toy cars on my birthday. I froze. Then I heard my father respond, his voice quieter, more calculated. "You keep pushing and one day someone will talk. Be smarter about it. We don't need loose ends right now, not with the Thompson deal already under investigation." They were talking about silencing someone. I didn't know who. I didn't know why. But I knew enough to step back quietly, close the door, and pretend I never heard a thing. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the man who taught me chess, who called me champ, with the man whispering about making sure someone wouldn't talk. That was the day I stopped seeing my family as protectors, and started seeing them as something else entirely. Over the years, bits and pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. My family wasn't just wealthy, they were untouchable. My grandfather had been a senator, my father a real estate magnate with deep ties to public officials, and my uncle, well, let's just say he never had a job yet, somehow always had a new car. The strange thing was how normal everything looked on the outside. Barbecues, family vacations, picture-perfect Christmas cards. But underneath it all, there was a silence. A rehearsed kind. The kind you see in people who have everything to lose. I became obsessed with finding out more. I started listening, watching, reading contracts I wasn't supposed to see, Googling names I overheard, and I found articles that were pulled, lawsuits that vanished, companies that filed bankruptcy only to relaunch under new names. I once found a picture of my dad shaking hands with a man later convicted of embezzling millions from veterans' pensions. When I showed it to my mother, she laughed it off. "Sweetheart, that was just a charity gala. Your father met all kinds of people." But the look in her eyes told a different story, like she wanted to believe it too. Or maybe she just didn't want me to dig deeper. Then came the night I confronted my father quietly, cautiously. I was 16 by then. He was sitting in his study, sipping his nightly scotch. I stood by the door, holding an envelope. "What's this?" he asked without looking up. "Records," I said, "of the Thompson land sale. The numbers don't add up." He finally looked up at me, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he set the glass down. "You're young," he said, "too young to understand how the world works." "I understand theft," I said. "I understand blackmail." His face didn't change, but something hardened behind his eyes. "You're my son," he said, "and you will not speak to me like that." I stared at him, then left the envelope on the desk and walked out. He never mentioned it again, but the next day, the files were gone. My laptop was wiped, my bedroom was searched, sotsly. Not enough for a confrontation, but enough that I knew they knew I was watching. That was the first time I felt truly alone. But isolation has a strange effect on some people. It doesn't break us. It shapes us. While most kids in my high school were dreaming about the cars or prom, I was reading legal journals, watching Supreme Court hearings, studying whistleblower cases, memorizing how justice is actually structured, not the fake morality my family pretended to uphold, but real justice, the kind that cuts bone. I decided then I would become a judge, not a lawyer, not a prosecutor. A judge, because judges can't be easily bribed. Judges don't beg for favors. Judges don't ask for the truth. They command it. The night I told my mother I wanted to go into law, she smiled with pride. "You'd be the first judge in the family," she said, touching my face. Grandpa would be proud. If only she knew the reason why. If only she knew the quiet war I was preparing for. The house felt colder after my father's death. Not physically, the heater still worked, the windows still kept the wind out, but emotionally, hollow, like something essential had been removed and the structure remained only out of habit. He died suddenly. A heart attack, they said, no autopsy, no investigation, just a funeral filled with crocodile tears, powerful men in expensive suits, and one too many toasts to a great man. I was 22 then, already a year into law school, and already deeply suspicious. The day after the funeral, I asked to go through his things. My mother barely looked up from her coffee. "Take whatever you want," she said. He kept everything in his study or the basement. The basement? I hadn't stepped foot down there since I was a teenager, since the day I overheard the first whispers of the truth. But that morning, something told me to go down alone. Dust floated in the light from the small window. The air smelled of mildew and old leather. My father had built custom cabinets down here, oak drawers with brass handles that seemed designed to look like they held family recipes and holiday ornaments. But behind one of them, the third cabinet from the right, I noticed a slight gap in the floorboards. When I pulled the drawer all the way out and reached behind it, I felt a thin metal handle, a hidden latch. Click. Beneath the drawer was a narrow slot barely wide enough for a box file, and inside that space was a black binder. No markings, no labels, just secrets. I took it upstairs without saying a word, locked my door, closed the blinds. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. There were documents, transaction ledgers, wiring slips, internal memos, pages and pages detailing cash payments to obscure firms, offshore accounts, real estate bought for pennies, then sold to city developers for millions after certain zoning issues were mysteriously resolved. There were names I recognized, judges, city inspectors, journalists, but one page stood out. It was a list titled Leverage Active. There were only 6 names on it, and beside each name were notes, divorce threat holding letters, son caught with minor silence paid for, drug rehab photos media ready. I recognized every name, powerful people, politicians, business leaders. My father wasn't just rich, he was untouchable because he held the strings. And he knew exactly what would destroy people. Then, at the very back of the binder, there was a sealed envelope. It was addressed to me, just my name, Gabriel. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter in my father's handwriting. "Gabriel, if you're reading this, then either I'm dead or you're far more curious than I hoped. This family is not clean. It never has been, but it has always survived. You are different. I saw it in your eyes early on. That hunger for truth, that disgust at what we do. Maybe you'll be the one to burn it all down, or maybe you'll use this knowledge wisely and stay alive. Either way, you are your father's son. Never forget that. R.K." I read it twice. Then I burned it, because the moment I read his words, "stay alive," I knew. This wasn't just a file. It was a blueprint, a weapon, one I had to learn to use. I didn't go to school the next day. Instead, I scanned every page, uploaded backups to 3 encrypted cloud drives, one on a burner account, one under a fake name, one offline air-gapped. Then I hid the original binder in a bank deposit box in a different city, because knowledge like this didn't just make me a target, it made me dangerous. And I needed time to figure out who, if anyone, I could trust. My mother asked me later that week why I looked so pale. "Still grieving?" she asked softly. I nodded. "Yeah, just tired." She touched my arm. "He'd be proud of you. You're strong." I wanted to scream, to tell her everything, to ask her how much she knew, but I said nothing, because in this house, words were just another way to die. That was the week I truly became 2 people, the son and the seeker, and from that moment on, I wasn't just studying law anymore. I was preparing for war. After my father's death, my mother bloomed. That's the only word I can use to describe it. She wore darker lipstick, sleeker dresses. Her smile became sharper, like she wasn't just grieving, but finally stepping into the light after years of being in someone's shadow. And people noticed. At the memorial gala the firm hosted, she floated through the room like she was born to lead. No trembling voice, no distant stares of mourning, just firm handshakes, subtle nods, and practiced elegance. "I didn't know your mother had such presence," one of the junior partners whispered to me that night. I forced a smile. Neither did I. But the truth was, I didn't recognize her at all anymore. About a week later, I came home early from class and heard her on the phone. I wasn't eavesdropping at first, just heading toward the kitchen, but when I heard the words, "liability insurance adjustment," I stopped. "Yes, I made the necessary transfers. No, nothing in his name remains. It's handled," she said, her voice calm. "And the files he kept gone." I checked. I stood frozen in the hallway, heart racing. She paused, then added, "No, Gabriel doesn't know anything. He's a good boy, studious, naive." The words hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't naive, but maybe that's exactly what she needed me to be. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at my ceiling, remembering my father's words. "Maybe you'll be the one to burn it all down." And I wondered, Did she know I had the binder? Had she checked already and not found it? Or was she bluffing? Either way, the game had begun, and I wasn't gonna blink first. The next morning I made her coffee. Black 2 sugars, just the way she liked it. I handed it to her in the sunlit kitchen and sat across from her at the table like everything was normal. She smiled. "You're being sweet." I smiled back. I figured we could talk. "About what?" "Dad?" I said. "About the business, about what you're planning next." Her expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened just slightly. "There's nothing to plan," she said gently. "The partners will carry things forward. I'm just managing what's left." I nodded slowly. He didn't leave a lot of instructions. She tilted her head. "No, your father was many things, but predictable wasn't one of them." I stared at her, trying to read the face I had once trusted with my nightmares, and for the first time in my life, I saw nothing behind her eyes. Nothing but a perfect performance. A few days later, I tested a theory. I left a printed copy of one page from the binder in her mail pile, disguised as a bank error notice. It was a harmless page, just an anonymous transaction routed through a dummy firm. I watched her open it from behind the kitchen doorway. She read it, folded it, and walked straight to the fireplace. Burned it. No questions, no calls, just flames. She knew. That night, I updated my backup drives and changed the passwords. If my mother could pretend to grieve so perfectly, I didn't want to know what else she could fake. There was a saying one of my professors used often. "Justice is blind, but those in power see everything." I used to think he meant corruption, but I realized something else. Power isn't just about wealth or connections. It's about performance. How well you lie. How easily you sell an image. How completely you can convince others that you belong even when you're a wolf in designer heels. My mother wasn't just a grieving widow. She was an actress in a theater where only the rich got to write the script, and I was done being part of her cast. One evening, I asked her directly. We were sitting in the living room sipping wine. Classical music played softly behind us. "Did you know everything Dad was doing?" She didn't flinch. "Define everything." "The bribes, the shell companies, the land scams." She took a long sip of wine, then looked at me with that same unreadable gaze. "I knew what I needed to know," she said softly. "And what I didn't ask." I stared at her. "That's not an answer." She smiled, tired and sad. "It's the only one you're getting." In that moment, I realized something brutal. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even ashamed. Because in her mind, this wasn't evil. It was survival. And the scariest part, she believed she was protecting me. If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. The invitation arrived on a silver tray. Literally. A hand-delivered envelope, thick and cream-colored, sealed with our family crest, a pair of scales set beneath a laurel tree. It was from my uncle. Dinner at the estate, family only. Sunday 8 p.m. No RSVP required, no explanation, just a command wrapped in civility. I knew what it meant. They were circling the wagons. I was being summoned. The estate sat just outside the city on a hill that overlooked the rest of us like it owned the sky. I'd spent summers there as a boy, chasing cousins through the vineyards, jumping into the pool, roasting marshmallows under string lights. Those memories had always felt golden, untouched by the shadows that came later. But this time the gates didn't feel like welcome arms. They felt like iron teeth. When I arrived, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that only happens when money and paranoia meet. My uncle greeted me at the door. Gabriel Knox. Polished, gray-templed, and sharp as a blade. He was the kind of man who could charm a room full of billionaires and still leave with their wallets. "Gabriel," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder like we were war buddies. "Glad you came." "I didn't know I had a choice," I said. He chuckled. "You're always welcome here." I looked him straight in the eye. "That's not the same as being safe." The smile didn't leave his lips, but something behind his eyes flickered. And just like that, the game was on. Dinner was a performance duck breast with cherry-glazed vintage Bordeaux jazz humming softly in the background. Around the table sat the family, Aunt Marlene with her perfume and fur-trimmed silence, Cousin Theo nursing a third glass of wine with a twitch in his jaw, my mother poised and unreadable in sapphire silk, and Uncle Dorian king of this rotten castle. They talked about politics, real estate, managing risk, all while pretending I wasn't the one who held the loaded gun, a binder full of evidence sitting in a safe deposit box under a fake name. And then it happened. Halfway through the meal, my uncle leaned back and said casually, "I heard you've taken an interest in family history." The room stilled. Even the jazz seemed to fade. I set my fork down. I think it's important to know where we come from, I said. Indeed, he said, but sometimes too much curiosity can be dangerous. Aunt Marlene gave a polite cough. Theo poured more wine. And my mother, she just kept eating. No defense, no deflection. She was letting this play out. I found something recently, I said, an old file. Dad must have kept it hidden. That got Theo's attention. He looked at me sharply. Dorian kept his smile. And what did this file say? Enough to ruin every single person at this table. The silence that followed wasn't loud, it was cold, weighted. My uncle leaned forward, folding his hands. You're a bright kid, Gabriel, but you're not a player in this world yet. I don't need to be, I said. I just need to be honest. He shook his head slowly. Honesty is a virtue for poor men. I laughed once, sharp, bitter. No, honesty is a weapon, and I'm getting very good at using it. After dinner, I slipped out onto the back patio. Theo followed me. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. You have no idea what you're doing, he muttered. Try me. They'll bury you. Let them try. He looked at me. There was fear in his eyes, yes, but also something else. Shame. They made me sign things, Gabriel, he said. Fake companies, dummy checks. I didn't even know what half of it was for. But you kept signing. He looked away. I was 17. I softened, just slightly. You ever think about coming clean? He exhaled smoke. Every day. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and hit record. He didn't stop me. Say that again, I said. And he did. Back in my car, I sat in the darkness for a long time. I had what I needed. Confirmation, a co-conspirator, a witness. But I also had a choice. Do I expose them now, without a title, without power, and risk being crushed? Or do I wait, rise, become the very thing they fear? A judge, someone they can't buy, can't silence. Not without bringing the whole house down with them. That night, I made my decision. I wouldn't just bring the truth to light. I'd make sure the light came from inside the courtroom. Law school never felt like enough. Not for someone like me. While the others stressed over torts and civil procedure, I was studying things most students didn't care about. Judicial ethics, prosecutorial misconduct, the psychology of confession, the anatomy of cover-ups. My classmates wanted careers. I wanted justice. Not the pretty scripted kind. The kind that cracks bones. But even as I pushed ahead, top of my class law review clerking offers from half the state, I could feel the weight of duality creeping in. Every time I got an A, someone at home celebrated with champagne. Every time I got closer to becoming a judge, my mother beamed at me like I was fulfilling her dream. You'll finally restore the family name, she'd say. Make us respect it again. She had no idea that restoration meant burning the house down. One afternoon, I returned from class to find a letter slipped under my apartment door. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. My father sitting beside a man I didn't recognize, middle-aged, balding, nervous eyes at what looked like a hotel bar. On the back, Thompson 2003, no mistakes. The handwriting wasn't familiar, but the message was clear. Someone out there knew what I'd found, knew what I was digging into, and they were sending me breadcrumbs, or a warning. Or both. I spent the night cross-referencing everything I could find on Thompson. There it was. A zoning commissioner, disappeared in 2003, body never found. His final ruling, blocking a development deal that would have cost my father millions. The project was shelved, and then suddenly approved 6 months later after new evidence surfaced. New evidence, or a new corpse. That same week, I was invited to speak at a legal symposium. They wanted me to give a talk on integrity in the judiciary. The irony nearly made me choke, but I accepted. Not for the spotlight, for the networking. The speakers list included half a dozen federal judges and a senator rumored to be next in line for attorney general. I didn't care about their autographs. I needed allies, people whose names would matter when the fire started. At the event, I wore a black suit and a smile sharp enough to cut granite. I delivered my speech calm, polished, righteous. But beneath the podium, my hands were clenched. Because every time I said the word justice, I imagined my uncle's smirk. Every time I said truth, I remembered my mother's silence. And when the audience applauded, I knew I had played the part perfectly. Afterward, a federal judge named Helen Rayburn approached me. Sharp eyes, minimal makeup, no patience for flattery. You speak like a man who's been lied to, she said. I blinked. Excuse me. She smiled faintly. It's a compliment. Idealists are rare these days. I hesitated, then asked, what happens when the rot starts inside the family? Her gaze didn't flinch. Then you sharpen your blade and become the surgeon. I held that thought for weeks. Meanwhile, back home, things were shifting. My mother stopped asking about my classes. Theo stopped returning my messages. Uncle Dorian bought a house in the Caymans. The walls were moving. I needed to act soon, but not yet. Because power is a ladder, and I wasn't at the top. Not yet. That fall, I applied for a federal clerkship under Judge Rayburn. She accepted within 2 days. No interview, no second guessing. Just a note. We'll do good work together, but don't bring ghosts into my chambers. I knew what she meant. This had to be clean, surgical. No theatrics. I spent that winter in D.C. reading briefs and watching the machinery of law grind slowly, painfully toward truth. Some days it felt hopeless. Other days it felt like I was finally inside the engine room of justice. I watched how judges weighed evidence, how defense lawyers danced, how prosecutors overreached, and how even the smallest truths could crack the biggest lies if aimed correctly. I wasn't ready to expose my family yet, but I was learning where to strike, when to stay silent, when to speak so loud no one could ignore me. By the end of the year, I had built the case. Timeline, documents, motive, confessions. But most importantly, I had learned how to tell the story, not as a son, not as a victim, but as a man of the law, and that story would bring them to their knees. I didn't expect to see her name again. Not in the news, not in my inbox, not in any world I currently lived in. But there it was, a headline tucked into the bottom corner of a legal ethics blog I followed. Former whistleblower sued for defamation by Knox Group subsidiary. My chest went still. Her name was Evelyn Marks. She'd been a compliance officer at one of our shell corporations, Westridge Holdings, and 10 years ago she'd tried to go public with evidence of embezzlement and illegal zoning favors. My father had crushed her, or rather the machine he built did. She was fired, blacklisted from every major financial firm in the state, and then quietly erased from the public eye. No news, no follow-up, just silence. And now, she was fighting back. I found her through a friend who worked in corporate defense. Evelyn was running a tiny bookstore in Baltimore. No staff, no online presence. Just a narrow door with peeling paint and a handwritten sign, "Back in 5 minutes." When I walked in, she looked up from behind the register. Mid-40s, worn eyes, strong hands. She didn't recognize me, not immediately. I introduced myself, and I saw the shift in her face. A flicker of fear, then disgust, then the wall came up. "I don't talk to anyone with that last name," she said. "I'm not here on their behalf," I replied quietly. "I'm here because I read your report, the one no one else did." She stared at me frozen. "I believe you," I said. We talked in the back room over lukewarm tea and stacks of unsold memoirs. She told me everything. How she found the financial trail. How she tried to report it first internally, then to the SEC. How she got the knock on her door at 3 a.m. from 2 men in dark suits warning her that persistence can be dangerous. And how every job interview after that mysteriously evaporated. They took everything she said, my career, my reputation, my safety, all because I thought the law mattered. "It does matter," I said. She shook her head. "No, power matters. Law is just the costume." I leaned forward. "I'm going to change that." She laughed bitterly. "And how do you plan to do that? You think wearing a robe makes you immune to them?" "No," I said, "but knowing their playbook makes me dangerous." Before I left, I gave her a burner number. "If you ever want to testify," I said, "you'll have a real courtroom." "I've had enough courtrooms," she muttered. I nodded. "Then at least let me use your story." She didn't say yes, but she didn't tear up the number either. That night, I added her files to the archive. It was growing now, not just my father's binder, but new evidence. Testimonies, financial links, legal memos. The web was spinning itself. All I had to do was keep feeding it. But the next morning, someone had been in my apartment. They didn't take anything. They didn't leave a mess. They just moved one item. The photo of me and my father that had sat on the bookshelf since I was 12 was lying flat on my desk, face down. Message received. I moved the files to a second location. Rented a storage locker under a fabricated identity, steel reinforced, no cameras. I encrypted all my devices, started using signal jammers when I worked at home. Paranoia, maybe, but I'd seen what my family could do. And I wasn't going to end up like Evelyn. Judge Rayburn called me into her office that week. "Your work's been excellent," she said, "but you're distracted." I hesitated. "I'm fighting something personal," I admitted, "but I won't let it affect the chambers." She studied me in silence. "Then Gabriel, you need to understand something. The robe protects you, but only if you haven't already bloodied your hands." I swallowed. What if the blood isn't mine? Doesn't matter, the stain spreads. That night I dreamed of a courtroom. Empty benches, a gavel in my hand, and every member of my family sitting in the defendant's box looking straight at me, not with fear, with recognition, as if they'd always known this was coming. And maybe they had, because I'd never belonged in their world. But I was going to end it, one ruling at a time. It's strange how quickly a mask can become your real face. By the time I returned home for the spring holiday, I was no longer pretending to be the quiet, obedient son. I was him, on the surface, polished, measured, charming when needed, distant when required. My mother complimented me on how mature I seemed. Theo didn't speak to me directly. Uncle Dorian shook my hand like I was a promising investment, and I smiled at all of them, because that's what predators do before they strike. They smile. I needed to get closer, not to trust them but to learn. So I accepted an offer to join the family office over the summer as an advisory liaison. It was a meaningless title, but it gave me access to everything: old contracts, property records, consultant invoices. Most of it was clean, but some of it wasn't. One document caught my eye. It was a payout schedule labeled Sunset Operation, 2021 to 2024. The amounts were massive millions being funneled into a chain of shell accounts every quarter. The recipient firm, Holloway and Crest. I recognized the name. It was the firm that Evelyn Marks had warned about. The same firm that supposedly went bankrupt in 2015, except it was still active under the surface, and my family was still feeding it. The next week I asked my mother about it. Casually, over breakfast. What was Sunset Operation? She didn't even blink. Oh, just a land rehab deal. It collapsed years ago. Strange, I said, sipping my coffee, because I found records of it still moving funds. Her spoon paused mid-air. Then calmly, "You've been looking at outdated files, sweetheart. Don't overthink it." I smiled and nodded, but her eyes lingered on me for just a second too long. She knew I was watching, and I knew she was lying. I copied the documents, added them to the archive, but I didn't stop there. I started showing up to meetings, asking questions, subtle ones, innocent ones. Things like, why did this land title get transferred twice in a week? Or how come this consultant was paid without a deliverable? At first they humored me. Then they started shutting doors. I'd walk into conference rooms and conversations would end mid-sentence. Files would be missing from the shared drive. Access permissions mysteriously changed. I played dumb, let them think I was intimidated, all while feeding every new scrap of information into the growing war chest. I even dated someone they approved of. Her name was Callie, daughter of a family friend, bright, warm, sharp as glass. She worked in city planning and was clearly being groomed for a political future. At first I thought she was just part of the disguise, someone to keep them believing I was still on their team. But over time I started liking her. Too much. One night she made me pasta and we sat on her tiny balcony laughing about court cases and her impossible boss. Then she said something that froze me. "You know you're not like the rest of your family." I stared at her. She added softly, "I mean that as a compliment." I didn't respond, because I wasn't sure it was true. One night while she slept, I opened her laptop. I wasn't proud of it, but trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. I checked her recent files, messages, and call logs. Clean, almost too clean. Then I found it. A scheduled call with Uncle Dorian labeled strategic zoning conversation. No notes, no context. I didn't confront her. I just left, because now I knew even the people I let close were part of the machine. Back in DC, I received an unmarked envelope at my apartment. Inside a printed photo. Me and Callie at dinner laughing. On the back, "Be careful who you trust. D." I didn't call her again. I didn't tell her why. Because in this war, even affection was a liability, and I had no more room for liabilities. I doubled down, studied harder, spoke less, watched everything. And slowly I began planting seeds, anonymous tips to investigative reporters, redacted documents slipped to regulators, whispers leaked to watchdogs, but never enough to link back to me, just enough to shake the tree, just enough to see who came running. And then it happened. One of my planted tips triggered an inquiry into a city contract. A harmless one, I thought. But the day the report aired, my cousin Theo showed up at my door. Pale, sweating. He didn't even knock, just barged in and locked the door behind him. "They think it's me," he whispered. "They think I'm the leak." I stared at him. "Did you tell them I wasn't?" He didn't answer, just shook his head. "They'll bury me, Gabe. They'll end me." I sighed. "Then maybe it's time you told the truth." He didn't respond, but he sat down. And for the next hour, he told me everything. How they threatened him, used him, forced him to forge signatures and move money, and how one time he'd helped cover up a wrongful conviction because a witness was getting too close, and my family made sure the case went cold. I hit record halfway through. His voice cracked, his hands shook, but he didn't stop talking. And when it was over, I had the peace I'd been waiting for. The one confession, the one thread I could finally pull, and unravel the whole damn tapestry. The moment I hit upload, I knew there was no going back. Not to the old version of my life, not to my family, not even to safety. I encrypted Theo's confession, then sent it anonymously to 3 independent journalists, 1 judicial oversight board, and a trusted contact within the Attorney General's office. The file was clean, voice verified, no metadata pointing to me. Just one line attached. If justice matters, start here. Then I waited. Publicly, I kept up the act. I attended hearings with Judge Rayburn, wrote my legal briefs, sipped coffee in the court cafe while reading through case law like nothing was wrong. But inside I was wildfire. Theo had given me names, dates, locations. One of them was Gordon Bell, the man who was wrongfully convicted. I found his case buried in a decades-old database labeled fraudulent real estate transfer. Sentenced to 10 years, served 8. His only crime, trying to stop a development he claimed was using illegal land seizures. The land now a luxury golf resort bearing my father's name. I visited Gordon Bell 2 weeks later. He lived in a low-income complex on the edge of the city. He didn't answer the door at first, but I didn't leave. When he finally opened it, he stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. "You're one of them," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm the one trying to end them." He didn't believe me, not at first. I wouldn't have either. But then I pulled out the printouts, the ledgers, the fake deeds, the forged approvals, and finally the sworn audio statement from Theo. "I can clear your name," I said. He sat down slowly. Then he started to cry. In the following days, I compiled a full legal brief, wrongful conviction, prosecutorial misconduct, evidence suppression. Judge Rayburn saw me working overtime. She didn't ask what it was for, but one evening, as we walked out of the courthouse, she said, "Your eyes look different." "How so?" Like someone who finally stopped waiting for permission. I paused. "I'm going to bring a case," I said, "a big one." She nodded. "Then be ready for it to break you." The next morning, the journalists released the story. A whistleblower alleges decades-long corruption scheme tied to prominent Knox family. They didn't name me, but they named everyone else. Theo, Dorian, the firm, the shell companies. It was a bomb dropped onto the city's morning coffee. Within hours, my uncle's office was swarmed by investigators. My mother called me that afternoon. I let it ring, and ring, and ring. Then I turned the phone off. That night, Callie showed up at my apartment. She hadn't seen me since I disappeared from her life. She stood in the doorway, eyes flashing. "You knew they'd come after me." "I suspected," I said quietly. "You left without a word." "I didn't know if I could trust you." She laughed bitterly. "You think I was working for them?" "You were meeting with Dorian." "I was trying to get away from him. He was cornering me about zoning favors, blackmailing me with things from my family's past. I didn't tell you because I thought, maybe you were part of it." We stood there, 2 people trained to lie, trying to figure out how to be honest. "I'm sorry," I finally said. She stepped inside. "You should be," she whispered, "but I'm still here." We watched the news together. Arrest warrants had been issued for 3 high-level executives linked to the Knox portfolio. One of them was Uncle Dorian's longtime partner. Theo had entered protective custody. My mother had gone silent, but I knew better. Silence in our family never meant surrender. It meant strategy. That night, I checked the archive. Every file was still there, intact, but something felt different, heavier, like the closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. I had no illusions now. The war wasn't over, not even close, but for the first time, I wasn't pretending anymore. I was a judge in training, a son in rebellion, a witness to corruption, and a soldier of truth. The confession came quietly. It was 3 in the morning when I got the message, a voice memo sent to the same encrypted channel I had shared with Theo. I didn't recognize the number, but the voice, it was unmistakable. Uncle Dorian, slurred, shaken, drunk. "You think I don't know what you've done, Gabriel. You think Theo acted alone, that coward wouldn't know which end of the gun to hold. They were all in on it. Your father, your mother, even the damn judge in the old Bell case. We did what we had to do to protect what we built. You think justice matters? You think this game you're playing means something? We were building an empire, and now you want to burn it all down over a few bad papers. You're a Knox. You were supposed to inherit this, but instead you're standing with the beggars. You're no son of this family." Then the recording cut off. No apology, no regret. Just anger, contempt, and confirmation. The next morning, I added the memo to the master archive and updated the investigative team. I no longer had to dig. They were handing me their sins on silver platters now. Meanwhile, Judge Rayburn summoned me into her chambers. The air was tense, her desk unusually bare. "You're making waves," she said flatly. I waited. I got a call from someone I've never met. Said you were going after your own blood. I nodded. "I am." She studied me for a long time, then stood, walked around the desk, and handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a signed recommendation for a junior federal judgeship. My hand shook. "I'm not done yet," I whispered. "I know," she said, "but you're going to need the bench if you want the war to end where it should, in a courtroom." That night, I sat alone on the courthouse steps. The city buzzed behind me. Headlines now read like chapter titles in my family's obituary. Knox, family holdings, frozen amid federal probe. New evidence may overturn. Wrongful conviction. Calls for judiciary reform. Grow as whistleblower case deepens. And in smaller print, sources suggest Knox family member cooperated. No one had named me yet, but it was only a matter of time. And strangely, I didn't care, because for the first time I saw it clearly. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about redemption. It was about removal, stripping the infection from the bones of justice, even if it meant amputating part of myself to do it. I visited Gordon Bell again. This time I brought him a certified letter. A judge had agreed to hear the motion to vacate his conviction. His case would finally be reopened. He held the letter in trembling hands. "You're doing what they couldn't," he whispered. "No," I said, "I'm doing what they wouldn't." And as I walked back to my car, I knew. My name may be Knox, but my legacy would be mine alone. The first time I stepped into Judge Rayburn's courtroom alone, it felt like walking into a cathedral, one built not for worship, but for war. The walls echoed every footstep like a warning. The bench loomed high, the flags hung heavy, and the silence settled like smoke on old battles. I wasn't presiding yet, not officially, but I'd been given temporary administrative oversight as part of a judicial rotation program while my nomination processed. For those few weeks, I'd be the closest thing to a judge I had ever been, and my family knew it. The calls started the day the announcement was made. Some were from reporters, others from unknown numbers that never left a message. But one call came from my mother. I let it go to voicemail again. This time she didn't sound angry. She sounded tired. "Gabriel, please, I don't know how much of this you started or how much of it is even true anymore, but whatever you think you're doing, whatever justice you believe in, you're going to get someone hurt. Maybe yourself, maybe people who don't deserve it. You're still my son, and even if you hate me now, I love you, and I'm scared for you." Click. It should have broken me. But it didn't, because love without accountability isn't love at all. The federal court docket had already been flooded with filings tied to the Knox investigations. My name wasn't on any of them, but my fingerprints. They were everywhere. The prosecutors knew, the defense teams knew, and Judge Rayburn knew. But no one said it out loud. Not yet. Instead, I watched the cases move like tectonic plates, slow grinding inevitable. Every day more records were unsealed. Every week new charges were added. By the end of the month, 6 high-level arrests had been made. My uncle disappeared, fled the country, probably to somewhere without an extradition treaty. Theo entered witness protection. My mother, she lawyered up, and still hosted her garden club like nothing had changed. Then came the day I never thought would arrive. I was assigned a pretrial hearing, routine, a procedural motion from the defense to delay based on undue media influence. But when I saw the case number, my stomach twisted. 2025 CV non-Nibur 7-1, the Holloway and Crest case, one of the shell firms directly tied to the fraudulent payouts, and listed as a party, Knox Holdings represented by Ellen Knox. My mother. Protocol demanded I recuse myself. Conflict of interest, blood relation, all the standard ethical red flags. And yet, the motion wasn't directed at me. The system hadn't caught, it hadn't flagged the overlap. It was a clerical accident, but a telling one. I had a choice, step away quietly, or face her. That night, I called Judge Rayburn. "I need to recuse," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Then you can, but do you want to?" "I don't know," I said truthfully. Gabriel, I've watched you walk through fire for the truth. But here's the problem with fire. It doesn't stop when the lies are burned. It wants more. And sometimes it burns the ones who stood up for you too. I won't let that happen. Then be certain, because once you step into that room, you're not her son anymore. You're the law. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk staring at my name printed on a case folder across from hers. G. Knox vs. E. Knox by proxy. A son standing as the gatekeeper to his mother's judgment. I entered the courtroom 20 minutes early the next morning. The lights were dim. The air smelled of wax and paper. I sat behind the bench reading the motion briefs, preparing questions, trying to forget that the woman walking through those double doors had once sung me lullabies. At 9:03 a.m. the doors opened, and she walked in. She wore gray, no jewelry, no lipstick. Her lawyer, a man with a $5,000 suit and a 10-cent sole, carried her briefcase. She didn't look at me until she sat down, and even then it was brief. A flicker of recognition, a pause of memory, and then stone. Like I was just another robe on a high bench. I cleared my throat. This is a hearing on the motion to delay proceedings in case 2025 CV 94701 on the grounds of pretrial publicity, bias, and discovery overload. All parties present. Her lawyer answered for her. I stared directly at him and ignored the part of me that wanted to crumble. The motion itself was weak. It argued that public pressure had compromised fairness, but the evidence was circumstantial, media noise, social media speculation. No proof of systemic bias. I questioned both sides, unemotional, precise, by the book. When I turned to her counsel and said, "Is your client prepared to proceed with full discovery by the date mandated by the district?" my voice didn't shake. He turned to her. She nodded once. That was it. A silent yes from the woman who had raised me. A signal that she knew the game was over, but would play it out anyway. The ruling was issued that afternoon. Motion denied, trial to proceed. I recused myself formally after that. The ethics office would have flagged it eventually, but I wanted the record to be clean. But in that brief moment, for those 36 minutes, I sat on the bench opposite my mother and chose justice. Later that night, I got another voicemail. "You did what you had to do. I see that now. I just hope someday. You can see me as more than the lies I protected. I did it for your father, for our legacy, for you. Maybe that was wrong, but it's the only way I knew how to survive. Goodbye, Gabriel." I didn't delete it, but I didn't answer either, because survival without conscience isn't a virtue, it's a disease, and I wasn't going to let it spread anymore. They say the truth sets you free, but freedom has a cost. By the time the trial date arrived, my name had already begun to circulate in legal circles, not as a whistleblower, not as a victim, but as the man who quietly, systematically dismantled the empire that bore him. Some people praised me. Others whispered that I was a traitor to my blood, and I welcomed both, because praise and suspicion are twins in the house of justice, and I wasn't here to be liked. I was here to finish what I started. My mother appeared in court on the third day of the Holloway and Crest trial, not as a defendant yet, but as a critical witness and implicated shareholder. She wore black this time. Not mourning black, strategic black, symbolic black. Her testimony was supposed to be simple, procedural, financial, limited in scope. But then the prosecution asked her one question that cracked everything open. "Were you aware that funds were being routed from Knox Holdings to Holloway and Crest, despite its official dissolution status in 2015? She paused, just a moment too long. Then I was told they were compliance reimbursements. By whom? My late husband. And you never questioned them. She adjusted her posture. My role in the company was symbolic. I wasn't involved in daily operations. But you signed off on wire transfers totaling over $6 million. I did what I was instructed to do. That sentence, "I did what I was instructed to do," hung in the courtroom like a cold wind, because it was the defense of someone who had long ago surrendered her conscience. After court, I didn't return home. Not to my apartment in D.C., not to the condo I'd been assigned during judicial training. I drove. Hours. No destination. Just motion. Because my head was loud and my heart was louder. It wasn't the betrayal that hurt anymore. It was how normal it had become. Sitting across from my mother as she justified a crime. Hearing the numbers as if they were receipts, not graves. Watching old family names be read aloud by prosecutors like names on a tombstone. By midnight, I stopped in a rural motel off Route 11. No Wi-Fi, no service, just a small room with wood paneling and a ceiling fan that ticked. And for the first time in months, I let myself feel the rage, the grief, the loss, because justice isn't clean. It doesn't wash away what's been done. It just replaces guilt with silence. And that night, the silence nearly drowned me. When I returned to the city, the courtroom was on fire. Not literally, but every news outlet in the country had caught wind of the case's significance. Not just one family's corruption, but the systems that had enabled them. Former city officials, zoning officers, legal aides, all of them suddenly under scrutiny. It was a domino chain I'd barely planned for. And I knew what came next. They'd come for me. The first subpoena arrived 2 weeks later, a formal request for my communications during the investigation, a challenge to my impartiality, a suggestion that I'd use privileged legal access to orchestrate the case. It was from the defense attorneys. Smart move, because even if the court dismissed it, the smear would stick. A son going after his family. That was a headline that didn't die easy. Judge Rayburn called me into chambers. "They're trying to paint you as a vigilante," she said. "I know. You understand what that means. It means I hit a nerve." She didn't smile. "Gabriel, we clean the system with the system, not around it. And if you've broken procedure." "I haven't." "Then prove it, not to me, to them." So I did. I opened my archive to the investigators, all of it, with date stamps, metadata, logs of every submission, every tip. Even the redacted names I'd passed through journalistic channels were listed chronologically with external confirmations. They spent 3 days reviewing it. On the 4th, the court rejected the subpoena. No misconduct found. But the warning was clear. I was now officially part of the story. And stories get twisted. Meanwhile, more people came forward. Not out of courage, but out of panic. When the structure cracks, the termites scatter. Former CFO's assistants, even a retired judge who admitted he was pressured by a Knox lobbyist 20 years ago to expedite a land case. Each confession added weight to the avalanche, and at the center of it all was me. I didn't want it. The spotlight, the mythology, the whispered name in law school's Gabriel Knox, the son who became a sword. But I didn't run from it either, because the truth, it doesn't need an audience. It just needs air, and I was breathing it for the first time. Then came the moment I didn't expect, an invitation to speak at the National Judicial Reform Summit, a keynote address titled Inherited Guilt and Institutional Redemption. I stared at the email for a long time, and then I said yes, not because I needed to be heard, but because I wanted young lawyers, judges, students to know that justice isn't something you inherit, it's something you choose over and over again, even when it costs you everything. At the summit, I wore a plain suit. No insignia. I stood on a bare stage alone, and I told them my story, without names, without theatrics, just a voice, just truth. And when I finished, the room didn't applaud right away. It was quiet, reverent, and in that silence I saw it, not admiration, not pity, but recognition from every person who had ever had to choose between silence and consequence. And I knew I wasn't alone anymore. Afterward, a young law clerk approached me, eyes wide, barely 24. "My parents work for Knox Holdings," she said. "I've always been told to keep my head down, but after today," she paused, "I think I want to apply to the public defender's office." I nodded, "Do it. And when they say you're too idealistic, be more." That night, I walked back to my hotel in the rain. No umbrella, no coat, just soaked and smiling, because the storm no longer scared me. I was the storm now, and justice had just begun. The day the verdicts came down, the city seemed quieter than usual. No horns, no helicopters, just an eerie hush, as if everyone was holding their breath at the same time. I stood at the back of the courtroom, no longer a clerk, not yet a judge, just a man who'd watched the machine tear itself apart from the inside. And now, at last it was done. The jury returned guilty verdicts on all major charges: racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to obstruct justice. Lesser charges followed like dominoes. The prosecution's closing argument had been surgical, relentless, impersonal. But for me, it wasn't impersonal. It was blood. My mother wasn't in the room. She had accepted a plea deal a month earlier, reduced sentence in exchange for full cooperation and testimony. I didn't object, because the truth wasn't about punishing her. It was about making sure she could no longer pretend. And she didn't. In her final statement to the court, she didn't cry, didn't grovel. She said, "We raised our children with poisoned bread and told them it was tradition. Gabriel didn't just break the cycle, he exposed it. I don't expect forgiveness, only understanding. He chose the path we all feared, and I respect him for it." Those words didn't heal me, but they mattered, because for once, my mother didn't hide behind the family crest. She stood in front of it and let it fall. After sentencing, the judge called me to his chambers. He was an old man, gruff, no-nonsense, the kind who chewed on pencils and spoke in clipped syllables. "I knew your father," he said, not looking up from his notes. "He tried to buy me once, 30 years ago." I said, "No," never forgot the look in his eyes. He finally looked at me. "You got a spine, kid, but don't let it turn into stone. You'll need to bend if you want to last." I nodded. He signed a letter, my formal recommendation for appointment to the federal bench. It would still take months, maybe longer. Appointments don't happen overnight. But the wheels were turning, and for the first time in my life, they weren't being greased with bribes. They were grinding forward because of merit, because of truth. I visited Theo before he was relocated. His name was gone, his identity replaced. Witness protection was a lonely purgatory, but one he'd chosen. "I'll never get to live in the open again," he said, sipping bad coffee in a government safe house. "No," I said, "but at least you get to live with a clean conscience." He smiled faintly. "You know, I thought you were crazy when you started all this. I still might be. But you did it. You actually did it." I didn't respond, because I hadn't done it alone. Theo's confession, Evelyn's courage, Judge Rayburn's quiet support, Gordon Bell's forgiveness. It had taken all of them, and maybe that was the real lesson. Justice isn't one man with a gavel. It's 1,000 choices made in the dark. Callie reached out weeks later. A letter, not long, just enough. "I watched the trial. I saw what you did. I don't think I'll ever fully understand the pain you carry, but I want you to know I'm proud of you. I always was. You don't have to respond. I just needed you to know." I folded the letter gently, placed it in a drawer beside my father's photo, the one I never threw away, because some ghosts don't leave, and some shouldn't. They remind you of what you refuse to become. Months passed. The media moved on. The scandal became a case study in ethics classes and criminal law seminars. My name was attached to headlines I never read. Instead, I focused on the work, teaching, reviewing cases, sitting in on hearings, waiting for the call. It came one morning while I was walking through the university law library. A quiet voice on the other end. "Mr. Knox." "Yes. We'd like to officially invite you to the bench. Confirmation is expected. Full induction by fall." I stood between rows of dusty legal texts and let the weight of that moment settle in my chest. Not joy, not pride, just quiet readiness. The same kind I'd felt years ago, when I first opened that binder in my father's basement. Back then I was a boy uncovering rot. Now I was the man holding the scalpel. My swearing-in ceremony was brief. No photographers, no fanfare. Just a room full of people who understood the cost of the robe I was putting on. Judge Rayburn stood beside me. She said only one thing as she pinned the federal insignia to my lapel. "You made your own name." And that meant more than any oath. As a judge, I knew I wouldn't hear flashy cases every day. Most of the time, justice is quiet, methodical, unseen. But every once in a while, a case would come across my desk that reminded me of home. Corruption. Power. People willing to sell their souls for another zero on the check. And when that happened, I didn't blink. Because I'd already seen the worst. I'd lived it. And I had survived. Not untouched, not unscarred, but clean. Now, sometimes after court, after chambers, after the doors are locked, I sit alone in my office high above the city, and I look out the window at the skyline my family once built. Glass towers, marble lobbies, fake legacies. They used to represent control. Now, they just look like shadows of an era that's ending. I keep one thing on my desk, a small framed quote, etched in brass. It says, "Justice is not vengeance, it is truth in motion." I don't know who wrote it. Maybe no one. Maybe I did. But I read it every morning before I put on the robe. Because I need the reminder. That justice doesn't come easy. It doesn't come clean. And it never comes without sacrifice. But it does come. Because someone chooses it. Because I chose it. Even when it meant walking away from everything I knew. Even when it meant standing alone. Even when it meant putting my own name on the line. And I'd do it again. Every day, until my final breath, because I wasn't born to inherit power. I was born to end its abuse, and now finally I do.